Edition of Celtics Beat. We are back, and maybe, just maybe, so are the Celtics. It was just despair and gloom last time we chatted. Maybe with help from Washburn, we sent things in the right direction. 4 straight wins to take the season to the All-Star. It's where we are now, a couple days away from that Mid Classic in Atlanta to get to there. I'm Adam, of course, you know Evan Valenti, our producer, and his triumphant return. While we've missed you, Chris Mannix. How are you, man?
I'm good, man.
Good. I'm glad that you were able to put aside your, I'm sure, coveted spot in line at Top Shot to do this show.
You know, maybe it is a sign of aging, but I can't think of anything more dumb than Top Shot. I just can't. To be paying actual money for videos that I can just, quickly look up on YouTube to claim ownership of them or whatever it is. I was a big baseball card collector back.
Same.
But like were tangible physical things that I still have somewhere in the basement. A video, but I don't.
Yeah, it really is an amount of money that is being sent around online for these digital moments, obviously, and people believe this is just the next wave of collecting, and especially hard collecting, and the partnership that clearly exists between the end and Top Shots. That's a feather in people's cap in terms of this thing legitimacy. But I'm with you, and again, maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's not, because Evan's considerably younger than both of us. But I as someone who grew up collecting cards, I like to hold cards and read the stats on the back and trade them with buddies and put them in my little holders and sleeves and binders or whatever, and just have them. I was never in it, I guess, just for the profitability, that seems to be the wave right here with this thing. People are just looking to flip them and make money.
Didn't they do this with like pictures of cats years ago? Wasn't that a thing? Like,
I don't remember.
I'm not in the cat trading card business, Chris. I can't.
But it was like digital clips of cats. It was like, you could buy weird looking cats of some kind. I don't know. Like, that was another fad that just fizzled out. And look, again, maybe I'm wrong, but this is kind of one that I just can't see it.
Yeah,
I don't get it either. It's just, you have, like, with the actual physical card, those eventually run out, right? Like the Hannes Wagner baseball card, the most famous baseball card in existence, right? There are only so many of those left. These clips live on forever on YouTube. I mean, what are we talking about here? I just don't understand it. I mean, look, if you're gonna make money, good for you. Like, congratulations. Like, if you pay actual legitimate money for that, I think you're an idiot. So
yeah, look at it this way, I guess. If in fact we are behind the curve, we are collectively, all three of us, behind the curve, and everyone else is out there making some money. But fortunately, just to bring it to obviously the topic at hand, the Boston Celtics, going from behind the curve, behind the 8 ball, behind the whatever they were, just, really difficult to watch, not fun at all. Things have flipped just a little bit. I'm not going to sit here and say everything is fixed, everything is awesome. But, you go from that 7-14 stretch, and a lot of guys missing time, injuries. Marcus Smart is still out until who knows how long, should return sometime here shortly after the break. We hope that is what, direction he is trending in. But the 4 straight wins and everyone's staying on the same page. That seems to be the big thing that has been talked about by the players, by Brad Stevens. It's, this was such an easy time where people could have pulled apart from one another, and all the adversity and all the noise and everything on the outside. We've come together. It's made us closer. It's made us stronger. A lot of that stuff is cliche, Chris. We know that. We've heard it for years in these similar situations. But nevertheless, are you a believer this team is now on the right track, or is this just a good little run here into the break?
No, I think they've righted the ship to a degree. They were never as bad as they looked at their very worst in the last couple of weeks, but they're not as good as they have looked at different points earlier in the season. I thought, from talking to people in the organization about what was going wrong during that tough stretch, it was a lot of kind of rock rolling down the mountain where, some guys were down and you just couldn't pick them up. You couldn't get them to believe again. Even the guys in the locker room that did believe they were better than they thought. So I think there was just some negative momentum that this team got caught up in. And however it happened, whether it's, Jeff Teague playing with more aggression, Robert Williams stepping up and playing a bigger role, they seem to have corrected things a little bit. Now, look, they still have flaws that can, cause them to go into another spiral. They still are over-reliant on unproven players. Marcus Smart is still out, and we're not exactly sure when he's coming back. And those are issues. Those are lingering issues that are going to cause you to lose some games. But I think the negative momentum that they got wrapped up in, they've reversed that. And that's at least a positive step in the right direction going into the break.
Yeah, the thing with me about the Celtics team, you talk about reliance on guys like, Shemi Ojale and Grant Williams and all that stuff. And we've talked about that over the past couple of weeks, that their roster is not ideal right now. They're relying a lot on Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. My big concern, and it echoes last night in a game against Toronto, right? They gave up 70 points in the first half to a very depleted Toronto squad. Toronto had 21 threes in that game. It's a very losable game for Boston. Lucky to somehow find a way to win that. To Jayson Tatum hit some big shots down the stretch. Chris, the offense has been great, and I think I saw somewhere this morning where Boston in their 4-game win streak has like the highest offensive rating in that 4-game stretch of any team in the NBA, which is a really, 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 really small sample size. So don't get too excited about that. But I still have problems with this team defensively. And that's, you go back to, all the good that you can feel with this team finally righting the ship. But I still see a big problem here with, you have a team that if Kemba or Jaylen or Jayson's not feeling it that night, you're going to be in some big trouble because the other team's going to put up a lot of points on you.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And look, their defense has always kind of perplexed me, right? Like, I could understand how they were good, 2 or 3 years ago when Al Horford was there, and he's a really good defensive player. Aaron Baines clearly fit into the system. But then, last year they maintained their place in the top 10 with like Enes Kanter out there for big minutes. So I could never really figure out how they were always so good defensively. I think what they lack this year defensively, and maybe the development of Robert Williams in the second half will address that, but they lack some versatility there. Like, Tristan Thompson is a very good on-ball defender. At least he has been a very good on-ball defender. Versatility is not really his thing. Like, switching out and going 3 positions and playing the kind of way Boston big men have played in recent years. And when you throw something new into a system that's been running one way for a while, that can have some damaging effects. And I think that's affected their defense. Now, they without Marcus Smart, you lose your best on-ball defender. Your defense is going to suffer. But Kemba has always been a subpar defender. Jaylen and Jayson are very good, but you've got young guys coming off the bench, whether it's Peyton Pritchard or whomever, who are average at best defenders. So you're not able to throw top flight defensive guys at teams these days. And that's something I think it's going to need to be addressed, whether it's via trade or something else, or some guy at the buyout deadline, because I know this team's not as strong defensively as they've been in recent years.
We'll get into potential additions and obviously that TPE and the stuff that people really want to talk about. And shortly before this show started here, you have the Blake Griffin news. He is a free agent, at least as of this moment, the buyout with the Pistons. So we can get into all that. But just both of you have mentioned Robert Williams. And Chris, if you don't know, certainly listeners of this program do. Me, Evan, very high and have been for years on the Robert Williams, fan club. You just want to see this guy get more of an opportunity. You see the flashes, you see the signs. It looks like we are seeing him grow into a foundational piece, a guy that, by no means is he untouchable in a trade or something crazy like that, but he is a guy who projects to, really be a potential cornerstone to this team's future, along with the obvious guys like the All-Stars and Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Maybe there are a couple others there as well. But for Williams, are you high on this guy's ceiling? Would you like to see him playing out there more, 25 minutes a game versus closer to 16, 17? We are trending in that direction. Or do you see the injury concerns and some of the reasons that he has been limited as something that's just going to forever keep his minutes down, at least in the short term?
Well, when he's healthy, absolutely. I'd like to see him out there playing 25 plus minutes a game. I've thought for the last couple of years, as you watched him start to show those flashes you're talking about, that there's real DeAndre Jordan, Clint Capella type potential in Robert Williams, a, floor running, shot blocking big man that can just terrorize teams defensively. And that's obviously still there. We've seen that over the last week and a half, 10 days. It's just The injuries are the obvious thing. You got to stay on the floor, but consistency and not making those occasional knucklehead plays, which, sometimes they're occasional, sometimes they're not. That's something that Robert Williams has to continue to address, because as you get into the playoffs, you need guys that can play as close to mistake-free basketball as you can, and that might make a Tristan Thompson more reliable or a smaller lineup more reliable. If Robert Williams can show that he's able to play, close to mistake-free ball, I think he's going to be a major factor for this team beginning in the second half of the season and going into the playoffs.
Yeah, I asked the question to the Twitter sphere a while ago, a couple of days ago, and I just basically asked, Rob Williams is the best lob threat Boston's had since blank. And I got a lot of great responses. Even Bob Ryan chimed in with Bill Russell, which I thought was interesting. But, you have a guy here in Rob who's now starting to really get comfortable, especially on the offensive side of the floor. And I love the fact that now, again, you watched the game last night against Toronto. I know it's only one game. You can see the lob threat and what that does, not only for Rob, but for the guards as well, right? Because now the lob thing has been happening over the past couple of weeks, and Toronto makes a little bit of a defensive adjustment to that, where they have guys stick to Rob a little bit more, which gives a guy like Jayson Tatum or Peyton Pritchard, Jeff Teague, or Kemba Walker a little more daylight when trying to get to the basket, trying to get to the rim. So, you look at developing that, and I got a little bit of a back and forth with Bob Ryan about this, and my point was, if this is the first guy Boston's had like this in 60 years, it is something that would behoove them to develop that guy as quickly as humanly possible, to just have that skill set as ready to go as they possibly can as we get towards the playoffs here. And look, again, Rob's going to do some bonehead stuff throughout every single basketball game. It's just the part of the growing pains, right? He's like a baby deer out there sometimes, but you can see the upside. The upside is a guy that can switch a little bit defensively, can really alter, a lot of wing guys' airspace. You saw the block on Man the other night. You saw the block on Brandon Ingram back in New Orleans, where, Rob Sykes off him to take away the drive, then, can recover in quick enough time with his length to block a shot at the 3-point line. I mean, there's nobody. Rob has a skill set that nobody on the Celtics has. And if they can develop that to be a serviceable rotation player by the time we hit the playoffs, you're talking about a different Boston Celtics team, especially if Kemba Walker is going to be the guy we've seen the past couple of games.
Yeah, and the block and finish I like the most from the Toronto game was the one on Kyle Lowry. I think it was in the first half, where Rob beat everyone back down the floor and caught a lob in transition. That's the kind of play that exemplified what you want from him. Somebody that can create havoc and, doesn't just take forever to get back down the floor. I mean, that was a pretty impressive play. I mean, you're right. The knucklehead stuff still happens, but again, it's about minimizing it, because you do want him on the floor for all the reasons you outlaid. That's why I kind of mentioned DeAndre Jordan. I mean, DeAndre Jordan was a very limited, still is, but was especially a very limited offensive player in his time in LA, but he was able to be a double-digit scorer because he caught so many lobs, because he had Chris Paul just firing him up there for him every time they ran screen and roll. I mean, you're not going to tell me that DeAndre Jordan had a more advanced offensive skill set than Robert Williams. It doesn't exist. So all Robert Williams has to do is stay out of foul trouble, try to be as disciplined as possible, set good screens, and then just roll off him. And he's going to get 8, 10, 12 points per game if he's playing 30 plus minutes off plays just like that, and create that wrinkle that you're talking about defensively. That's going to give teams something else to worry about with this group. So yeah, he's a vital part of what this team hopes to do in the second half.
Celtics right now are narrowly above 500 because, again, that long skid that they had going on. And, we're basically at the midpoint of the season, again, the All-Star break. And this is a club that I think that its ceiling in the past has been maybe a little inflated, just because it is contended to a point, right? It's reached the conference finals 3 out of the last 4 years. But even this is something, we were harping on each of our last couple of shows the last couple of weeks, that, even if they had, as many people thought they should have, beaten Miami last year, the Celtics certainly weren't going to knock off the Lakers, so it depends on sort of the semantics of
how don't tell them that. Don't tell them that, because
well, that's fine, but
they believe they had a better matchup with the Lakers than anyone.
Well, I believe they had a better matchup than Miami. I do believe that, but I don't believe they were going to come out of that series with a victory. Now, they should believe that they're going to. That's great, but I think most of us watch, and maybe you agree, and see that, okay, there's still a gap there. There's still a gap, obviously, between the LeBron and AD led Lakers versus where the Celtics even were last year versus where they are right now. And they're not right now where they were at the end of last year. I think most people agree with that. And so it becomes that question of, again, the TPE, and, is it going to get used in the next few weeks before the trade deadline? Is it going to push off until obviously the off season? Is it ever going to get used? Because we know historically these things a lot of the time don't. And some of the names that are attached right now, just in rumors, you've got Harrison Barnes, who a lot of people covet. There's Jeremy Grant. There's obviously Vooch in Orlando, who people keep coming back to. I bring him up all the time. And, now not a TPE situation, but obviously Blake Griffin, who's, entering the buyout market, and he'll be a free agent and more likely go to more of a true contender versus where the C's are right now. How do you see all of this playing out? Does there need to be an urgency to use that TPE this season? Or do you think it's as has been hinted at by Danny, by Wick, by others, this thing is going to get pushed off?
Well, look, it's you have to look at it from a few different angles. One, it's definitely true that the TPE, which I believe will expire sometime in September, will have a value in the offseason, because you can make a trade, and you never know what teams are going to want to do after their season ends. There could be a better player available. All that being said, one thing I look at with this group is that while they are young with a lot of upside over the next 5 or 6 years, what Brooklyn's going to become scares me a little bit. Like the Nets, this might be the year you get the Nets. Otherwise, the next 3 years, you could be running into a buzzsaw of a team with Kyrie, James Harden, Kevin Durant, and everybody that wants to play with them. Like, you think that, New York City, Durant, Harden, Irving, if there are going to be role players flocking there, because not only can you contend for a championship, but you can have a real role with that team. Like they've basically got average guys outside of Joe Harris at those other positions, whether it's center or one of the other guard spots. I mean, for a while, they were quite literally signing guys off the street, whether it was Andre Roberson or Iman Shumpert and others. So, they're still trying to figure it out this year. That's why using the TPE to get something that helps you now could give you your best opportunity to get to the finals over the next, 2 or 3 years. I'm just of the belief that if you're going to catch Brooklyn, this is the year you're going to have to do it, because next year you're going to have another year with this group. I fully believe Kyrie and Kevin Durant will sign up long-term after their contracts expire. They become a really, really dangerous team over that next 4 or 5 years, which is the window that Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown are in with this Celtics team. So I'd be proactive. All the names you mentioned, I think are possibilities. I've written this and I'd still do it. It wouldn't be my first choice, but I would go and get Al Horford back if that was possible. I know Oklahoma City is willing to deal him for not minimal return, but not an outstanding price. You can fit him in the TP. You can include Tristan Thompson because of the hard cap issues. And we know that Al Horford can help this team. Like, we know it. We know what he does with this literal group of players and the system that they play in. So I would have urgency to go and use that TPE. I'm not convinced that the Celtics front office and ownership has the same sense of urgency.
Should they? This is something we talked a lot about last week with Gary Washburn, the fact that it's funny how when you talk about the Celtics, they almost get criticized for their level of loyalty, right? Oftentimes in sports, we talk about the lack of loyalty being a problem. Well, with the Celtics, there's no lack of loyalty from ownership to management to the coaches in terms of obviously Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens. They're locked up long-term. They're not going anywhere. Neither of these guys has any fear for their jobs. And I'm not even saying they should, or that, I'm calling for their heads or anything like that. Although obviously we've explored the idea of just inserting some new voices in there just to, not have Danny or have all the same guys around him that are, like-minded. Maybe you do need a different voice, and a different voice, maybe a veteran player other than and Evan Turner on that coaching staff. But
I do think you need that. I know Gary said this to you a while back, but I think that's 100% true. I mean, when they lost Walter McCarty, that was a pretty strong voice, someone that would get in guys' faces in that locker room. Evan Turner is a very, he's a very smart guy, and I think could be a good coach. But at this point, I think Evan Turner still fancies himself a player in a way. Like he's, that close to being a regular player, made a whole bunch of money. I do think you need that voice. Like that has to be priority number one in the off season when you're addressing the coaching staff.
But in my in my blabbering fashion, to circle back to the main point, is it a problem that it doesn't seem like, as you alluded to, there is that urgency? Like, does that urgency need to exist? Does Danny need to be a little more fearful for his longtime reign in Boston?
Not fearful, no, because he won a championship in the 2000s. He orchestrated the trade of the century in the 2010s, and now here we are in 2020 in this decade, and I think he's got a lot of leash to figure things out. I do think, to touch on something you said there, they have been way too loyal and way too protective of some of these assets. I mean, we may never know exactly what happened with the Gordon Hayward situation, but everything I was told was that Indiana was willing to part with some key pieces, headlined by Miles Turner, who this year is a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year, and that Gordon Hayward and his family wanted to go and play in Indiana. So I'm of the belief that a deal like that could have been worked out. The Celtics overplayed their hands a little bit, and that could turn out to be fatal for this season. To let perfect be the enemy of good. Like, maybe you couldn't get exactly what you wanted, but something is better than nothing, especially as you watch this team and you see how they play without Gordon Hayward in that mix. Now, they do have the trade exception. That could turn into something substantial, that 6 months from now, we're talking about them being geniuses for making that move. But right now, hell, I'd take Miles Turner. I'd take Doug McDermott. Both those guys would be playing significant roles for this team. It's hard to look at the unwillingness to make that deal as anything but a mistake. And it shows that maybe there isn't that sense of urgency with this team to win right away.
Yeah, maybe they should, though, because you said we go back to the Brooklyn thing. They're going to be a force to reckon with for a while. Look at what's going on in Philadelphia right now.
Yep.
Joel Embiid, look, if everybody's health is always going to be a question mark, right? Whether it's Durant, whether it's Kyrie, those guys have been banged up. Embiid has always had an injury history, but when Embiid's healthy and engaged like he is right now, he's literally unstoppable. There's nobody in the NBA that can stop that guy from scoring 30 a game, right? And they have another Defensive Player of the Year candidate on their roster in Ben Simmons. Tobias Harris has regained. So there has to be a little bit, but you also have to find the right player, like that Harrison Barnes wing scorer that they need desperately is an interesting piece. Vucevic is an interesting piece. The Aaron Gordon, rumors that were flying around is another interesting piece. The one thing that they have to be, mindful of is, do they want to have a stopgap this year or sign someone long-term? And then all of a sudden you got to start saying bye to some other pieces. I mean, some people have mentioned the John Collins thing, but people that are smarter than me at the salary cap are like, well, if you're going to, try and trade for John Collins, then get ready to say bye to somebody you really, really like a Marcus Smart, because that he's not going to be cheap. So as much as people want to be, use that TPE, use it. It's not as simple as that, right? There are actual economics and math that has to be had. And this is where Mike Zarin comes into play as a guy that not only understands the cap this year, but, a decade from now, Zarin's got it on lockdown. So it's tricky. And you hear the fact that, people are getting sort of, a little anxious about what Boston will do, but this is a really tough place to be. Danny could have done a number of things to improve this team, but he has, as you said, maybe to a fault, been a little bit too loyal to some of his guys. And now here you are, Kyrie left, Al left, Gordon left, not too many more chips to play if you're Danny. So this TPE is like the one last shot they have to get this right. And, to hear that they might not use it until the offseason where more guys are, because the only problem, like Chris, the problem that I have right now is who the hell is going to be a seller here? I mean, the Jeremy Grant thing, is great, but like we just spent a whole summer hearing how Jeremy Grant only want to play for a black head coach, the black GM, and be the number one guy in a new city. Guess what? He's got that in Detroit, would not have that in Boston at all. So there are like what, 3 sellers right now? Maybe Detroit's going to be one. Oklahoma City's going to be one. Sacramento's hanging around. Minnesota is going nowhere. So I just you look at the landscape and I don't really even know who's available, Chris. It's just too many convoluted teams hanging around the same place in the standings. And now that you have playing games, I mean, there's no separation to really pinpoint who the real sellers are.
No, there's not. You can point to Orlando, which I think does want to get off their bigger salaries, though. To your earlier point, they're not just looking to give Vucevic away either. And even Aaron Gordon, they'll want something back in return. Atlanta, while Collins and Capella hasn't really worked, they're asking for a lot in trade packages for him. The only guys you can really get for the TPE and a draft pick are, from teams that are going in different directions. That's why I bring up Al Horford in Oklahoma City, and I brought up JJ Redick in New Orleans. These guys are not, going to be your first, second, maybe even third options, but they absolutely can be fourth or fifth and help you make a run this year. I mean, the last thing you want to do is get into the offseason and look around and realize that either A, there's nothing on the table for you, or B, you're going to make the same deal you could have made the trade deadline and maybe helped you during this season. So look, it's complicated. It's chess, not checkers out there. These GMs are trying to play, but I think at this point, being proactive, being aggressive, trying to do anything to fit a player into that TPE this year, it has to be considered a priority. I mean, I keep going back to Horford. I mean, are people watching Horford in Oklahoma City? He's been playing great basketball as of late. He kind of looks like it didn't work in Philadelphia, and that was largely because he went there thinking he was going to be a great power forward, and that didn't work. Now he's back as a full-time center in Oklahoma City, and he's been great. He has been shooting the three a lot better. He's been facilitating. I think his assists are up, above their usual average for any time in his career. His scoring numbers are the highest they've been since Atlanta. I mean, the contract that looks so awful is now basically obsolete because you lost a year and a half on it. I don't like that. To me would be like an easy move to make that would make you substantially better right away. I don't understand why that isn't at least a fallback option for this team. Maybe it is. Maybe you got to wait till March 25th, but I think that should be a fallback.
To put a bow on this part of the conversation anyway, just Blake Griffin. Again, Mark Stein has already attached him on Twitter, at least teams with interest. Won't surprise anyone. The Lakers, the Clippers, the Nets, the Heat, the Warriors, among those that have expressed interest in Griffin. Celtics not listed. Maybe they're interested. Maybe they're not. Honestly, I don't know. The bigger question is, do we even think Blake would come to Boston? Celtics fans are going to do their thing on social media. It's always the way. We're all going to be asked about it 1,000 times. I don't think there's any shot at him coming to Boston. I don't think he wants to. And I think it's more likely he's going to choose a team, as mentioned earlier. It's just closer to contending this season. I assume you agree with that?
Yeah, I've actually even been told that Boston's not on his list. I think the 2 LA teams, Brooklyn and Miami, are the front runners. Miami gives him, I think, more of an opportunity to play. The Heat, of course, lost Myers Leonard. They're one big man down. They've got Kelly Olynyk as a floor spacer. Griffin could kind of complement that. He's certainly not a floor spacer anymore. Not a very good one. But I think that Miami is kind of a dark horse in that mix. There are just too many teams that want Blake Griffin that offer more things. And if you're Blake Griffin and you're probably walking away with like a $60 million check to cover the rest of this season and next, you don't give a damn about money right now. So you're playing for the minimum and just choosing the best situation. And I don't believe Boston will be in the running.
So Chris, we'll let you go on this. The All-Star game is this weekend, and it's become my favorite mid-season Celtics talking head argument that it's really started a few years ago, and it's annual at this point in time. Should these guys play in the All-Star game? First it was Kyrie Irving, and then it's Kemba Walker, and now obviously you've got Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum. Brad Stevens was asked about it and said what he's always said, which is what you expect him to say, which is, it's one game in the middle of a week. They'll barely work up a sweat. No big deal. Now, if a lot of us had our druthers, maybe Tatum, who is still clearly recovering, at least on the floor, from the effects of COVID. And, he has himself said that his breathing has been out of whack. So he is not back to 100% Jayson Tatum. In fact, by his standards, he hasn't been a bad player by any stretch, but by his standards, he has been off the last few, 20 games or so. He is not nearly shot with the success rate that he did prior to that diagnosis. And then obviously Jaylen Brown with the knee tendonitis, it's his native Atlanta. That's fine. Go and be part of the festivities, take part in the 3-point shootout, because there's no wear and tear there, but skip the game, sit. I mean, that would be in a perfect world. That's how I would like to see this play out, but it's not a perfect world, and it's a players league, and nobody's going to tell these guys not to play. So is this just one of those things where people need to get over it, accept it, and, not bitch and moan about the fact that, oh my God, these guys are playing in an all-star game?
Yeah, I go back and forth on the All-Star game and whether guys should play, because it is, multi-layered this year with the pandemic, and should guys be going down there, traveling, all that stuff. I don't have a huge issue physically with Tatum and Brown going down there. They're not going to expend any real energy. And because of, the COVID restrictions, they'll basically be there for 48 hours. And I have found, and players have said this in the past, that you get something out of that if you're a young player being around other greats. Jaylen Brown's obviously never been there before as a player. Tatum, he's getting another crack. I think they will gain something from that experience that will help them in the second half of the season and beyond. And look, from a COVID safety perspective, they're probably a lot safer being a part of this. I mean, the NBA is going to keep them in the basic protocols. Now, the NBA says other players are going to be testing during their time off. I mean, good luck with that. Like, good luck getting guys going on vacation to, spit in a cup and FedEx it back to wherever you're sending it to. I'm highly skeptical that's going to happen. So I think they're probably safer from the pandemic being part of All-Star Weekend. I'm just like any Celtic fan, you're hoping that it's a nice, easy 15 minutes that the both of them play in this game, and then they're sitting on the bench in the fourth quarter getting their rest. And if that's how it plays out, I don't think there'll be any lingering issues.
Well, I think that's why people are so alarmed, is that's what people were hoping for with Kemba last year, and then he goes and plays almost 40 minutes, and then he's affected for the rest, for the last year.
Yeah, that's why I say go 15 and then let somebody else go out there and play. So yeah, we don't want you don't want a rekindling of that experience.
Well, we really appreciate you hopping on with us. We'll continue on with the show. We'll let you hop off, but thanks for being with us. Let's do it again soon.
Anytime.
All right. Chris Mannix, Sports Illustrated. Again, awesome having him with us. And Evan, obviously a lot of great stuff there. Do you, I'll let you circle back to some of what Chris was talking about. Would you like to go down the Al Horford road again? Does that make sense to you?
Well, the Al Horford thing is a way to kick the can down the road too, because you can get, Al Horford's contract becomes more tradable next season as a partially guaranteed deal. So you could maybe generate another TPE out of that. I know people are like, they love the fact that you can generate TPEs and, find a way to
our new favorite pastime.
Right. But I mean, Al's skill set is, somewhat perfect for what this team needs in terms of, some size. They could always use a guy that could switch defensively, a guy that moves the ball like Al does. I mean, you could see it, this team at times struggles to move the basketball. And when Al's on the floor, that doesn't happen. I mean, he, averaged close to, I think, 5 assists per game. His pretty much his entire Celtics tenure. He knows the system, as Chris said. It'd be a worthwhile look. The problem would be, I think, in my opinion, is I don't think he helps you win a championship this year. I just don't. I don't think he helps you win a championship next year. And if you bring him in, you're potentially using that roster spot or that money in like, we might not find another trade partner for Al Horford to generate another TPE. So, I mean, again, I love Al. Trust me. I was one of the biggest Al defenders when, Lou Merlone and Christian Fourier and everybody at WEI was going, and Mads Gallagher are all going after him for his lack of production. I've always been a staunch Al defender. I love Al Horford to death. I have a hard time selling myself on like Al Horford's going to be the big addition. It's like, no, we already saw that. And he's a couple years older now. despite having a great year. And I'm not saying he's not having a great year, and it won't cost a whole lot to get him, which is the other part of this whole equation. So I don't get too fired up about the Al Horford addition. I really don't. I just think I would almost rather use it in the offseason when you have a little bit clearer picture who's going to be available. The Harrison Barnes thing, I think, is everybody's number one. I mean, we had Scal talk about it last night after the broadcast, after the game with Abby and with Chris, about how that's where Danny really wants to go. You're only hearing about Jeremy Grant and Nikola Vucevic to steer everybody away from the fact that they really want Harrison Barnes. Again, I love Al. I just don't think it's really where they need to go to really be a true championship contender. Because again, I'm with Chris, that unless Brooklyn gets hurt, that's a really, really tough team to beat.
I certainly agree with what Chris said about, if you're looking to catch the Nets, this might be the time to do it, because to his point, we saw it to some degree in Boston years back. Obviously, we've seen it with any LeBron team, whether it's the Lakers, the Cavs, the Heat, stars, or at least, those who are kind of on the back end or haven't won a ring and are just willing to go for cheap, are going to flock to Brooklyn. No doubt about it. I mean, they are going to add to that mix more so than what they've got going on this year. No question. But even that in mind, and clearly in listening to Chris, he doesn't feel this way, but for me, if it's between, it's one thing if you're talking about Vooch, Barnes, Grant, guys like that, maybe someone we haven't even talked about, like that's a whole other conversation. But if you tell me, all right, you can use the TPE now on Horford or Redick versus going into the offseason with uncertainty, but obviously you're kind of punting on this year to some degree, and punting in the sense that at least you're just hoping the team finds the right momentum, the right mix. Kemba's healthy, others are healthy, Jaylen, Jayson, they stay on the floor, and maybe you can make a run. Maybe it's exciting. If you say to me it's between going after one of those two guys right now, get them this year, they're in, they help you for the playoffs, versus waiting to the offseason and using the TPE then hopefully on somebody better, I'd wait. I really would. I'd wait.
The question is who are we waiting for here? Like, who are the Celtics waiting for?
Well, maybe you're waiting on one of those three guys that we just mentioned. I mean, who's to say that any of those three do get dealt this year? To your point, there aren't going to be a lot of sellers out there, at least right now.
Yeah, we will know we'll have a clearer picture in like 2 weeks when we get there. But yeah, those guys could still be available. I mean, it just feels inevitable at some point that Karl-Anthony Towns is going to ask out. Now, I don't think that the Celtics can really entertain that. I think he makes a little bit too much money. I don't know. Anybody that's a cap expert out there are plenty of you.
Well, to that point, though, and this is something we didn't really talk about with Chris, and I thought about it. I just didn't, in the interest of time, I didn't want to go down this road. But the hard cap issue, which is something that obviously Wick has brought up, Danny's brought up, others have, cap people have brought up. You can only bring in a guy right now who earns around, 20 million ballpark, with that TPE, despite the TPE being 28.5, you can only bring in a guy making around 20, short of sending salary out, which is obviously what he acknowledged in trading a Tristan Thompson or something like that, versus the offseason when they're no longer hard capped and they can maximize the TPE.
Right. So that's, it feels to me like they're going to get, and it really is a lot about Kemba Walker. And what we're seeing lately with Kemba is a guy that's starting to kind of figure out his way back into the rotation and really feel more comfortable on the floor. And that's one thing I wanted to mention with Chris too. But again, with the interest of time, he has another hit in like 5 minutes. So we have to keep that in mind with Chris, busy guy. But like with Kemba, you're seeing it lately with his numbers. They're going up in a very positive direction, with the exception of last night, where I think he was a little, I think everybody was a little weird last night. Jaylen was off in the first half, got it going in the second half. He's been a really nice bright spot. I mean, the 3-point shots falling. He's getting in the line a little bit more, which is what I'm focused on. Kemba's got to go to the free throw line for him to be really successful. The ball's moving a little bit better. He looks like he's in better shape. So that's one big thing. You get Marcus Smart back, you get your defensive anchor back, you get a little bit of growth from Rob Williams. You just see what you have here. I think that's probably the way they're going to go, because I think that when they get into the offseason and things are a little bit easier for them to deal, and they have more, players on the market to deal for, I think that's going to make life a lot easier for you. And, look, everybody wants to throw out a couple of ideas in the offseason and who might be available. We never know these things. But like, it's just to have a clearer picture and not have the gun to your head, you got to make a deal in 2 weeks. Like there's a lot of stress and pressure that comes with that. And, Danny's a guy that never like wants to add that extra pick to get it over the goal line, right? We've seen that over the years. He's very reluctant to do something a little bit extra to get the guy that they want.
The Kyrie Irving deal came down to tacking on a second-round pick at the end.
Right. So I just, with the way that they've done deals in the past, unless it's for somebody very minimal, like they have a couple other smaller trade exceptions that they can use. Of course, there's always the buyout market too, but I don't think the big swing is coming. I really don't. And it hurts to say, because I would like Danny to swing for the fences here, but again, we don't know exactly where the fences are. So,
well, it's not surprising. Like, I mean, you're here every week, and I assume a lot of our listeners are too. I mean, I've been saying all season, I didn't think the TP was going to get used till the off season. I never thought this thing was going to get used this year. And if I'm wrong in the next 2-3 weeks, obviously we'll see, but certainly doesn't sound like it. Listening to Danny, listening to Wick, they don't seem to, again, have a pressing need to use it. And I don't think they are going to use it. I just don't. I think this is an off season thing. I think that they are, they've got what they've got right now. They're hoping it works out. They hope that, the Teague that we just saw in terms of aggressiveness is going to be there for the rest of the year. And, Robert Williams, same thing. And a lot of the things that we already talked about, Kemba, like you're saying, and again, this is where, again, it's like, it's not revisionist history. Because you go back, listen to the tape, been saying it for weeks. I was never worried about Kemba's shot eventually falling. I'm not, Kemba getting back on track as a player was not something that ever concerned me during his down stretch there. What concerned me and continues to is just the health of the knee. That's it. That is what concerns me with respect to the playoffs and when that approaches, keeping him on the floor and getting him out there for, the 33, 35 minutes a game that you're going to need him playing at a high level. And, if there's a back-to-back, not that you see those really in the playoffs, but just, his health and being in the right frame of mind and not being down on himself and, as he has said, moping, sulking, when things aren't going right for him. I want a confident Kemba out there. And as long as he's healthy, I feel good about him. And I mean, that's your tradable Kemba Walker, for the people out there that want to do that. It's not the guy that we saw earlier, but the shot was going to fall. Like, he's too good a player for him to just all of a sudden suck. That wasn't the worry. The worry was his ability to stay on the floor. And at the moment, generally speaking, he's doing that.
Yeah. Do you feel like he's turned a corner here? Because everybody seems to be in that particular groupthink mindset that Kemba is finally, again, past couple of games, he's really been more aggressive, hunting his shot a little bit more, shots falling, go to the free throw line. Do you think he's starting to really find that special place that he needs to find on the floor?
Only to the degree that runs exist, right? Like, he's going to have some bad games. It's not all of a sudden you're going to get 22-6 Kemba every single game or something like that. Like, Kemba's not, he's just not at that point in his career, or maybe it's health, or maybe it's mindset, or all the above. I don't think he's going to give you the level of consistency in terms of production that a Tatum or Brown or both are going to give you. I think those guys are just, they're just entering their prime at this point. And Kemba, he's getting toward the end of it. And obviously that has been slowed by injury. But, has he turned a corner, maybe more importantly, mentally? I would say yes. The question is, does a couple bad games send him back into a funk and reeling, or does it have him saying, whatever, like, I've seen this season what I'm capable of, I'll get back to it. This is just a little blip on the radar. That is something that I'm anxious to see how that plays out, because that, I think, is almost more important.
Yeah, they're not going anywhere if Kemba's not healthy. I mean, you see what happens when one of the Jays has
forever.
Yeah, one of the Jays has an off game, and all of a sudden life gets really difficult because, as we've mentioned a million times, they don't have another guy who could put the ball. Like, they have a bunch of guys that once they're in the corner for three and the rotation comes and they up fake and the guy goes by and they take the one dribble. After that one dribble, you got nothing. You saw Grant Williams last night have a really excellent game and really give them a boost. And without Grant Williams, they don't win that game. But Grant's, skill set offensively is very limited. I mean, he is a great 3-point shooter this season.
He's still not a fixture in the rotation.
Shooting 44% from three. I can't quite figure out what, is holding him back from being a mainstay there. I just don't really get it. But, Brad's rotations have been kind of awkward all season. Neesmith doesn't play for stretches again. Like I don't know. Like I maybe it's what you see in practice. And that's the one thing, as we talked about with, I think, a couple of guys, and Gary, I think, mentioned last show, we're not at practice. We don't see anything this year. Like we don't see, what is transpiring, behind closed doors, is to give us an inkling of what might be happening or what's on the horizon for this team. So there's a bunch of this whole season is a giant question mark, and to make it full circle here, like, do you go all in on a question mark season like this and try and push all your chips into the middle and say, yes, this is what we want to do? Or do you say, like, all right, we'll play the long game a little bit longer? Because the one thing you also have to remember, like, the Jays are young. Like, and I don't mean to bring in Steph Curry in this, but like, Steph Curry didn't win a championship until he's 26. I'm not trying to compare these two to Steph and Clay. That's not but you have to keep in mind that it takes time to win a championship. And your window might have looked wide open last year. That would have lost anyway to LA. We all can concede that, right? This season, we'll see with Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's going to have a nice run here with those three guys, but eventually, like, those three guys are going to come down a little bit, and the Jays will keep ascending. So that's the one thing that's difficult if you're Danny. But everybody's going to talk about the TP till they're blue in the face, and we won't know until the trade deadline's over what the hell is going to happen. But I would focus more on how Kemba looks. If Jeff T can really play like that, or if he's just, again, going to have a little bit of a spurt here. The Robert Williams development is crucial the rest of the year, and getting guys healthy again, because this team, every team is banged up, and it's hard to get a clear picture of any team with all the injuries going around right now.
I'm just excited let me pull up my calendar on my phone here. So the NBA trade deadline is what, March 25th, I think.
Yeah.
So let's say that, I don't know, maybe we wait that week. Maybe so maybe our show pre-trade deadline. I'm not locking anything in, but ballpark, right? Let's say it's we've been doing a lot of Thursdays. Let's say it's March 18th. So that whole show is going to be who the Celtics going to use the TPE on, going over all the latest rumors and rumblings and everything like that. Yep. And then we'll end up doing the post-trade deadline show. Let's call it Friday the 26th. And then it's going to be who are the Celtics going to use the TPE on this offseason. That's what I'm anticipating.
We're pre-planning, folks. This is called pre-production.
Yeah. See, normally this stuff is off air, but no, you get to see it happening in real time.
Right. This is the business, folks. So you get to see all the sexy stuff that happens in podcasting and developing shows for content. Oh yeah.
When you sign up. So our thanks to Chris Mannix here, SI. First time Chris has been on this show, and I think literally years. So it was awesome.
Was he your first guest? I think Mannix was your first guest.
I think he was definitely my very first guest when I took over the show. What I'm trying to remember is if he's been on since. So awesome to have him back, and hopefully we'll do it again sooner than than later. Clearly, always provides a lot of great insight, and obviously not only the local connections, but a national analysis as well. And a good time to have him on just a little bit ahead of the trade deadline and at this midpoint of the year in the All-Star break. So we will tell you what is on the horizon, and that is, of course, All-Star Sunday. Remember, everything jam-packed into one day. You got the game in Atlanta. You got the pre-game three-point contest, the halftime dunk contest.
Do either Jaylen or Jayson have a shot at the three-point contest?
A shot, sure. Will they win? No. What do you think? Who's gonna? You know what? The better question, really. And Jaylen was asked this post game last night and wouldn't get into it because he thought he was going to get fined by the league or something. Who do you think is going to win or do better between the two of them, at least out of the six guys?
Who's going to do the best, or which of the Celtics going to do the best?
Which of the Celtics? I mean, you got Curry,
Tatum's. I'll tell you right now, Tatum's an unbelievable. Just like open gym shooter. He is an unbelievable open gym shooter. And I don't think anybody's beating Curry. If anybody's going to do it, it's probably Booker. But Tatum I've been lucky enough to cover the C's and see some pre-games with CLNS. And when he misses, it's kind of like a shock. So underneath the clock and the pressure of other guys, maybe he cracks a little bit, but Tatum can really, really, really shoot. And I think we know all this already, but with nobody in his face and he's standing still, don't be shocked if he comes close, because he can really let it fly. And Jaylen has been an unbelievable shooter this year. And I don't want to make it sound like we're not, but Jayson is an unbelievable open chip shooter.
So there are 6 participants, just for funsies, because who the hell cares? what are your expectations? I'll say Tatum finishes 3rd and Brown finishes 5th.
It's probably accurate. I'll spice it up. I'll say Jayson loses to Curry in like the finals.
Okay, I like it.
And Brown. Who the other guys? It's Booker,
Levine, right? And one other guy.
I think Jaylen might come in last, but that's not because he's a bad shooter. He's a remarkably good shooter this year. And the confidence which he lets it fly now is unbelievable. But Jayson is an otherworldly shooter.
Now I want to look it up just so we don't send our listeners going to do that same thing. Let's see. Hang on, I'm going to tell you.
It is Booker, Curry, Jayson, Jaylen, Levine, and there is one more we're forgetting.
Yeah.
And it's going to bug us to the point
we're going to get it. This is really good.
We're doing it live, folks.
Radio or podcasting, whatever the hell.
It's the worst.
Let's see. They're easy.
Is it Mitchell?
It might be Mitchell.
All right. Well, somebody's going to Jaylen will talk trash to him. So they'll knock him off a little bit. See, that's the thing that's happening here too, is like there is like I don't know how much Boston can recruit at this point because of their cap situation, but there's like this.
Yeah. All right. Done. Finalized. Mitchell. Curry, Brown, Tatum, Levine, Booker, Mitchell.
Yeah. There's like this like underlying recruitment thing that always happens during All-Star weekend. I mean, the famous clip of Kyrie and Durant talking 2-minute slots, right? Yeah. Who are they talking about? Well, there's an opportunity here for some backdoor channel stuff going on here.
Sure.
And the Brad Beal thing obviously is an attraction.
Can't afford him.
Yeah, I know.
Mathematically impossible right now.
Right. But just the Beal thing is always going to be there. Jason's already talked about how much he wants to play with him, like how much fun it's going to be. And Jaylen and Donovan Mitchell always have something. And it was evident in the bubble last year where there'd be like some Instagrams where
they were going back and forth a lot.
It was just so fun. It was so fun to watch those two guys interact. So there's that going on too. How about those two guys going the 2 last picks, by the way?
Next Celtics game after the All-Star game, you got in Brooklyn Thursday. So here's what we'll do. We will probably come back to you Friday next week after the C's beat the Nets to start off the second half and then go from there. Look forward to it. Our thanks again to Mannix. He is Evan Valenti. I'm Adam Kaufman. This has been Celtics Beat. Enjoy a little bit of a break, folks. You've earned it.